Yeah. Sounds good. Yep. I don't have a clock that is you. Oh, damn. Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah. Yeah, quite serious. I was thinking to invite next week, maybe first, kind of a Twitter acquaintance, kind of a small name, so we can test the getting guests in first. And after a few successful tests, we can invite bigger names.
Hi, and welcome back to episode 3 of Silent Majority Reports. I'm Lee, and I have with me today Harold.
Hey, nice to meet you guys again. Nice to see everyone. Good to see you again, Lee. And let's have a great show.
So we've got 3 topics lined up today, and the first one is the China's their advancements in technology, and
indeed,
this is really interesting because engineers and scientists in China have got this new chip, and they've called it an all analog chip combining electronics and light. And I've actually spoke about this for some time now, that traditional chips tend to be made of silicon, and they're reaching their sort of their maximum ability. So if you look at the major fab houses like TSMC and just TSMC and maybe Samsung to a point, they're pushing what's called 3 nanometer, which is the smallest they can go. Now there is rumors it can go maybe to 2, but TSMC have had a lot of problems getting 3 correct, and this was sort of highlighted with the release of the iPhone 15. The actual Apple chip in there is not that much faster than the iPhone 14, and that's because of some issues on the yield. So they had to sort of lower the level that they would let that chip pass the inspection at, and that's why they have to sort of throttle it down. But it's reaching its limits. You know, you can't go thinner than 1 atom, and also you get heat issues. Well, when you move to light, you're not using electrons anymore, you're using photons, so you're using beams of light, and these are considerably faster than electrons. Obviously light travels at, I don't know, is it 186,000 miles an hour or something crazy like that?
But it's the physical limit of speed, right? It's the universe's maximum speed as far as we know.
Absolutely, yeah. But in testing, they've achieved 4.6 petaflops with this chip, and this is like 3,000 times faster than the current leading chip in AI is a chip by NVIDIA, and it's called the A100. And this has proven to be 3,000 times faster. And not only that, it's 4 million times more energy efficient, because obviously light, it doesn't use power compared to moving electrons around. This is a major breakthrough. The report goes on to say that right now they can only get it to do certain operations. It's good at things to do with images. Right now it can't like compress a file, but it's really good at like image recognition, AI image recognition, and for autonomous driving. But they're going to continue to research and push the boundaries. And this has actually been achieved by a group at Tsinghua University. And that's also interesting, because I remember reading about 2 years ago that after some of these US sanctions, the Chinese government has sort of put 3 different groups to work at Tsinghua. One was concentrating on graphene solutions, another one was focusing on photon solutions, and another one, I think, traditional sort of silicon based. So it's not that they're, you know, the world often talks about semiconductors made of silicon, but there are other alternatives, and those other alternatives have been explored quite heavily now, because, as I say, silicon is coming to its limits. And I think, you know, it's interesting that I also read an article, it's probably going back 1.5 years now, that Huawei were actually investing in a opto electronics production line, and I have a feeling this is based around this sort of light source semiconductors. So yeah, very interesting indeed.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points that I want to add to that. Like, one is the general observation, how technology evolves is always the limits getting approached with one technology, then a paradigm shift happens when a completely different type of technology comes. Famous example is always the digital photography versus the film-based traditional analog photography, where at the beginning this new method was actually a lot worse than the film-based, and at that time a lot of people said, well, film is never going to be replaced, digital has its niches where it makes sense, it can be transmitted quickly, but film will always be the better quality, which by now obviously is a thing of the past, long time gone. And famous case study in all business schools is Kodak, which said we're not going to go digital because film is better, and now Kodak doesn't exist anymore. Used to be the biggest, maybe for the Generation Z, that used to be a huge company because they were like the biggest film producer for like optical film.
I grew up with Kodak.
I knew it when I was
Kodak.
little.
Yeah,
you can kind of date yourself. But it's an example. Similar is, by the way, is electric vehicles. We're going to have more about that in a bit, where again, the first modern electric vehicles have low range, they have all kind of cranks, they're unsafe, etc. And within a decade, 2 decades, at one point will be at a point where I think very few people will still voluntarily choose a gasoline car over an electric car, except for very, very specific niche applications where you may need something else than electric. But in regular city traffic, commuting to work, etc., you'll always prefer electric. So it's always these flips that happen. So technology is not a linear progression. So it's always within the paradigm, there's some linear or some predictable progression, a speed at which the science advances. But then comes this paradigm shift where it just goes in a different direction. At one point, it flips to a completely different technology. And that brings me to the second point that I wanted to make, which is why does China suddenly prove to be able to do such high-tech breakthroughs when in the past they weren't? In the past, China was always very good at optimizing and applying new technology, but the basic technology came from the US and Europe, and Japan mainly. And that's now changing, and that shouldn't be a surprise if you think about how many hundreds of thousands of Chinese have studied in the last 10, 20 years at US colleges and European colleges and really learned the technology. And now, no, this is not technology theft. This is really the process of learning. These are experts who learned the latest developments of high tech. They're now doing research in China. And at one point, it's just a question of numbers. How many people do this high-tech research, this really basic research as well, and how much capital do they have available to do this kind of research? And if you look at the numbers, it's not that instantly the moment you hire an additional 500, 1,000 PhDs, then instantly you will get new technology breakthroughs. But eventually, if you have such a large number of really well-trained engineers who increasingly also choose to come back to China because they just get excellent offers here, and you give them enough capital to do their research, then you will get the breakthroughs eventually. And I think that's what we see happening now. So I'm not surprised. Like, I cannot predict what will be the next breakthrough that's coming from China, but I'm very sure that more and more fields will see Chinese tech breakthroughs with really new approaches and new concepts that aren't just an optimization of what's happening in current leading fields in the world, but rather just really new tech that comes from China.
Yeah, well, I was actually speaking to, about 12 months ago now, maybe a little longer, fairly senior person from the engineering development R&D department of Huawei. And he says, actually, a lot of the West say, oh, China are behind, China behind. And that's because they were happy to buy chips and that technology from the West. Their thing was, well, we didn't need to. It's no point reinventing the wheel. That was their attitude. Why should we spend, billions of dollars redoing something somebody's already done? It was only at the point where they realized that the West wanted to be, to somewhat of a better word, spiteful with that technology, that they realized that, we have to go down this road on our own. So they're coming from sort of a, something what the West may have been developing 10, 15 years ago. They only started doing that 3 years ago. And for what I can see, they're advancing relatively quickly. And, and I think I mentioned this last week, is that when Huawei released that Mate 60, oh, by the way, we bought the Mate 60 this week. And
nice.
It's an absolutely fantastic piece of kit. But there's a couple of points I want to make. So I lost my track of thought then, but so if you look at the Mate 60, a lot of the West go, oh, it's only a 7-nanometer chip, they're years behind the West. But like, when most people go into a store to buy a phone, they don't go, oh, I want a phone with a 5-nanometer chip or a 3-nanometer chip. They go, I want a phone that I can surf the internet, I can have a fast connection, I can send messages to my friends. And that Mate 60 does an absolutely amazing job of that. So in a sense, it doesn't matter what the technology of the chip is inside the device. It matters if the device performs well. And from what I see so far, the device performs extremely well. And the next point I want to make is that China now realize that, the West are not going to share that technology with them. So they realize they've got to do it themselves. And the ultimate thing that will happen is China will develop the whole supply and manufacture chain independently of anybody else, because they no longer trust the West to do it. So they will have their own.
And the whole microchips is a tiny thing. You don't even see the differences between the latest steps of tech evolution and stuff. But a similar example is the space stations, where it was the US that didn't allow China to participate in the International Space Station that was made between a bunch of countries together. So the Chinese said, well, if you're not allowing us to participate, we just do our own. And now it's everyone except the US is applying for China to allow them to join their Chinese built space station, because they're the only ones who still have a running space station. And the US, because of their own sanctions, are not allowed to participate. So they're going to be falling behind even further, because they cannot do specific types of research that you need to be physically in space to conduct.
Well, just on that space station thing, America pretty much relying on Elon Musk's SpaceX now, because they don't really have a sort of program of their own, and again,
he saved them from the shame to ask the Russians, right? They were using Russians
pretty much
to lift their space.
So can you bring the next slide up, Vicky? And so the next thing in this China's technology, Yangtze Memory Technologies, which is a company that manufactures memory for SSD drives and phones and that, they've actually just come out with not just come out, it's actually turns out they actually released a product with this in July of this year, and it's a layered technology for memory chips, and it's leading the world. There's no other company got the technology as dense as this. It's a bit technical, but it was reverse engineered by an American company called Tech Insights, and they have obviously like super surprised that China have been able to do this, and the density of the storage is higher than any other manufacturer's memory in the world, and that was, you know, they have I don't know whether you know what an NVMe drive is. It's like an internal SSD drive for a computer. They actually bought out a product of that in July of this year, so they've obviously been manufacturing it for some time. So that's really interesting. But just in the article, it's funny because a lot of these Western media, and they did the same with the chip in the Huawei phone, which was the Kirin 9000S, and they've done exactly the same with this. Oh, it's unclear whether China can produce it in substantial quantities. They always like put that on the end of you know, what they say, because they don't want to admit China have actually done something that they thought they couldn't do, you know. So it's always this, there's always this sort of thing, oh, maybe they can't manufacture many, you know.
Well, frankly, to me, that's really, we're entering the stage of copium now, also in this field, where we're just saying, like, you know, they just try to find another sentence they like to add is, but at what cost? You know, it's kind of like, when in history has China been weak at scaling things? Like, that was really always the thing that the Chinese have been really strong in. You know, like, they may not have been the ones who invent. And as you mentioned, why didn't they invent? Simply because it's way cheaper to buy technology if you're far behind the cutting edge. But the more you approach that cutting edge tech line, the more it makes sense that you invest more into R&D yourself, because you cannot buy anymore what's coming next. And companies will not be willing to sell it because it's their competitive advantage. And that's why China needs to develop it themselves now. And the thing is, as you said, they're now ready. And as I said, they have the research capacity, they have the HR, the people, the financial resources, they have everything in place. And the one thing that one branch of Western theory is completely wrong, in my opinion, is this idea that the political system of China is somehow obstructing scientific development, or somehow, you know, hindering creativity because it's oppressive or whatever. That's just
I think it's actually the opposite, because I think you have a lot more people in the Chinese government that understand technology and science much more than the politicians in the West.
The point that I was going to make is, where does most of the research happen in the West? It's in the most authoritarian part of Western society, because we always think of this digital authoritarian versus liberal kind of mindset. But reality is, most people in the West who work in big corporations, they work in very authoritarian systems where the boss is the boss, and he gets promoted because a bigger boss promotes him. Usually, rarely it's a her, and not because the workers at the bottom of the company vote somebody up into the higher echelons of the company. So corporations, by definition, in the West, are very much authoritarian systems, and that's where most of the research happens. There's university research that's a bit different, but from what I hear from university, from friends that I have who have become professors recently, you know, there's a lot of fighting also in universities, even though they don't have the authoritarian structure, but the fight for resources there is just as brutal and violent, and is by no means rational or fact-based. It's just political as well. So it's not that we have a liberal system which invents. We have, within the liberal political order, very much authoritarian systems where a lot of the research happens.
Yeah, I just want to make one more comment before we wrap this one up and move on. Is that I've made a number of videos about Chinese technology on the channel, and I often get comments like, "Oh, you know, China is so far behind; they will never be able to catch up." Blah 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 blah. But the fundamental things that are required to crack this technology are chemistry, physics, engineering, and maths. And China have that in spades. They have a huge amount of people who are studying those subjects. It's just a matter of time to put all that together, and it will come. But as I say, I'm very much a believer that there's a lot going on behind closed doors here. I'm 100% convinced that Huawei wouldn't have announced that phone if they didn't anticipate further sanctions, which to my mind means they're further along the road than they're letting on.
Yeah, lots more to say about both topics, but let's maybe move on to the next one. We want to keep it short and sweet for each topic, so that we have time in the end for viewer questions. I think definitely very exciting topic. The Chinese tech sector, that's something to keep watching. And we're going to have more with the cars in the end.
Yeah, we are. So down to you now, Harold, to introduce the next topic.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. And this one, honestly, we've hesitated a bit because the whole topic is so controversial that it's hard to get a right angle. But I want to mention it because I think it's very important also for Western audiences to know how the sentiment is in China. So let me start with the headline. Maybe if you can pull up the first graphic or headline that we have. So it's about the US that buys bulk buys Japanese seafood to counter a Chinese ban. And there's so many weird things related to that headline that I think it's worthwhile to talk about it. I mean, there are first the obvious ones. And I think we still have the topic list up, so that kind of covers the headline, if we can get that on. So yeah, the first one is just for me that how the US is really seeing everything through the China lens. Like, you know, even buying seafood from Japan, they do that to counter China. The second thing that I want to here specifically point out is how strongly the US is able to really control or influence global media, because this headline in this or other forms has been all over the media. This is not just one or two newspapers. All over they said, the US is countering China by buying seafood. And we'll look at the numbers in a bit to see how ridiculous this headline actually is. And then another point, how they only mention to counter China. And maybe if we go to the next, the BBC article, we actually note that by, oh, wait, this is a different one. Can we have the next image first? Did we skip the BBC? No, not this one. Where are we? Yeah, this is the one that I was going to point out first. Sorry if I messed the sequence.
No,
but
it might have been
yeah, well, the important thing here is to note that by far it wasn't just Chinese protests. So there's here this image of protesters in Seoul. And by the way, not only China bans Japanese seafood at the moment, also South Korea has banned it. There have been certain limitations also in Thailand and Malaysia, I think. So several countries in East Asia have banned the import of Japanese seafood or restricted it. And but the US only counters China. Well, there is one reason why it makes sense, because China is by far the biggest importer of Japanese seafood. So their impact may be bigger. But again, we'll get to that in a moment. Then if we get back to the one just before, that was from Taiwanese authorities that showed, yeah, this one. So Taiwan is led by a group of people that's very closely aligned to the US, also very closely aligned to Japan. They kind of feel they would rather be Japanese than Chinese, the people around Tsai Ing-wen, at least some of them. So they're very, very pro-Japan. But even they, in their study, what they say is after 2 years, when the water will have diluted all around the ocean, then it will be so diluted that it's no risk for Taiwan. So they're not saying it's not a risk now for the fishing grounds around Fukushima. And yeah, now if we can go to that one graph with the different nuclear power plants, how much tritium they, no, not this one, the one before. Yeah, this one. This is a graph in this form or others that has been shared a lot on Twitter, and the Western media have focused on this one, saying that tritium, this one compound that has nuclear radiation, actually is in very low density in this Japanese Fukushima wastewater. And that's why China shouldn't complain about it. That's why it proves that it's no risk. And I just want to point to several points that the Chinese perspective criticizes. And I think it's really important, even if you, like, I'm not the nuclear radiation expert, so I don't want to claim that I know which one is true. I see this data that looks like, okay, that water is really no risk. And then I see the Chinese viewpoints that I just want to share so that people who may not have heard them before know why Chinese are so upset. And really a lot of Chinese are upset. So one is that the IAEA, so the International Nuclear Authority, Global Authority on Nuclear Issues, they were not able to independently test this whole treatment method that TEPCO uses. TEPCO is the company that runs Fukushima. Nor was the IAEA able to independently collect data, but the data actually all comes from TEPCO. And after the accident at Fukushima, TEPCO has repeatedly lied about how, like, the status is and what the risks are. And so the Chinese just say, like, how can we rely on the IAEA if their data in the end comes from those who have repeatedly lied about the facts? So it's just not trustworthy data. And then another one, TEPCO apparently only tested 3% of the water, while they have hundreds of tanks, and they just said, like, 3% is enough. That's gives us an average. What if some of the tanks are much more polluted than others? So that's that hazard consideration. Another one, besides just the tritium that comes from radiation directly, there's also, because the water was actually in contact with the nuclear core when this core melted, there's a range of other pollutants like carbon-14, iodine-119, and cesium-137. So, for example, these are 3 highly poisonous materials that come from a nuclear core, which aren't in the cooling water of a normally running nuclear power plant. So even if the radiation is higher, it has less of these other pollutants. And just on a side note, recently some workers at Fukushima came in contact with the polluted water, and they were sent to the hospital. So just indications that there might be a risk. And again, I want to really stress, I'm not saying either side is correct objectively. What I want to say is people should know why Chinese are worried. There's a huge lack of trust and a lack of transparency. There's no access for external inspectors to check the situation. And even if you believe that there's no objective risk, I think it's important to know why there's this subjective unhappiness or like dissatisfaction with the situation.
Yeah, I think for me, it's again, like you've highlighted, it's you need to have trust in the data. And I think because is it TEPCO have lied numerous times or not been totally transparent, and that is it the IAEI, whatever the acronym is, the atomic agency. They've been getting their data from there. It does, but I also buy into the thing that, you know, the sea is a huge volume of water, so over time, you know, it'll be so diluted, it's like literally dropping a eyedropper into a swimming pool kind of thing. But I think, I personally, I think if there's any doubt, which there is, they shouldn't have done it. Now I look at it and say, if it had been China and not Japan the world,
Yes.
the collective West would have gone
Would be an
absolutely
outcry.
ballistic. You know, it'd have been in the media wall to wall for years, and yet
Yeah.
none of the West has really raised the issue that much. I know Korea have. It's mainly southern countries that have had more of the concern, not Western countries. And I just, you know, if the glove was on the other hand and it was China did that, there'd have been absolute hell to pay, and it had gone on for years and years and years, you know. And
especially
so
when they don't allow external inspectors in, right? They would be like, you see, China, they don't allow because they have something to hide. Definitely.
Well, you just look at the COVID situation, the amount of pressure China were put under to allow inspection, and they did. And yet, you know, there was a lot of possibility that COVID may have developed in the US. And the US just says flatly, no inspectors, end of.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just such double
Yeah.
standards and hypocrisy all the time, you know, and
Right.
they just don't see it, you know.
Yeah, and before we go too far off, I want to go back to that one graph you've shown it before quickly, the one that I've made based on two different articles. So here's the thing, because the US says, okay, China does this economic coercion by sanctioning seafood, and now we counter that by buying the seafood. So that's two lines of argument that you see in the media. But at the same time, they admit that this Chinese so-called coercion is absolutely ridiculous. If you look at the first graph, so Japanese seafood as percent of total Japanese exports on the left of that graph, what it says here is the seafood exports of total Japanese exports that include cars and high-tech TVs and, you know, all the things you get from Japan, high-tech country, seafood only makes up about 1%. So if that's, even if entire seafood to all the world is banned, it will just be 1% of Japanese exports. So there is no huge economic impact. Then if you look at the scallop export, which is the most important part of Japanese seafood that's exported, of that, some 50% go to China. So China has had a very relevant share of the scallop export. So for the scallop industry in Japan, this is actually a relevant number. And now you compare what those 50% in the middle of Chinese imports that now are stopped because of this temporary ban or maybe long-term ban. If you compare that to what the US buys, and I've used $1 million. So for Chinese exports to China, I have the number that's in million US dollars. So it's like $600 million that China imported last year. For the US, I've just seen on Twitter, somebody did a really cool calculation because the US admits they buy 1 ton of scallops. And if you check out bulk buying price for scallops, it's around $10 per kilo. So for those not familiar with the metric system, 1 ton, that's 1,000 kilos. So if you buy 1 ton at $10 per kilo, you get to $10,000 for 1 ton scallops. And that's the insane thing. Remember how in the beginning I said, like, all over the world, media have repeated that headline saying the US buys scallops to feed to their soldiers to counter China. They invested $10,000. Can you imagine that? If any company managed to get such a scoop to invest $10,000 on any campaign and get global media coverage, well, then I'm sure that marketing manager will be promoted. So that's quite an amazing feat. So, but my bottom line actually of all of this is, I believe China is not actually trying to hurt Japan economically, because they didn't, like, when Korea installed THAAD, that US anti-missile system that restricts Chinese nuclear countermeasures in case of a US nuclear attack. China was really angry at South Korea. They boycotted everything. The entire Korean imports to China just fell down. They're not doing this. So they're not actually boycotting Japan. Also, I've seen other articles in the Communist Party newspaper, Global Times, where they have various parallel discussions on how relations with Japan are improving, et cetera, et cetera. So I do feel what you said, this is really a ban because they're not sure. And in case you're not sure, you first just put priority on health. You ban, you check, and you see what the data really is when you do your own tests. And it may be that in a year, the Chinese say, well, we didn't find increased radiation in Japanese scallops, so we'll buy them again. I don't think that's impossible.
Yeah, I think the Chinese are very data driven, and I think, like you say, I don't think they're doing it to try and harm Japan. They're doing it because they're just not sure. I think at a point of time when there's data that they can look at and say, okay, we believe it's safe, I think they will continue to buy it. I just want to make one point early on, and I think you did actually touch on this, but early on there was a lot going around on Twitter about that. China released lots of this water into the ocean from their nuclear power stations. Right. But I think there's a massive difference here. Is the water that is released from cooling these nuclear reactors, it doesn't actually come into contact with the core. And in the Japanese case, it came into contact with the core. So that's a huge difference. And the other thing, that the substance they're talking a lot about is tritium, right? There's a lot of other things in there which they seem not to be testing for, or not as thoroughly. So it's I think it really needs some independent body to do a thorough investigation to say, look, this is absolutely okay, or this is not okay. But it's unlikely that's going to happen, unfortunately.
As you said, because the world is so politicized, people immediately jump into camps. You're either for or against. And because it's China, you're either for China or against China. And the global south, as you say, many countries decide on their own. They don't take camps. They just say, we're close to that region. We at the moment don't buy these products. And I think that's the smart thing to do for those countries. Why should they buy something where there's just some uncertainty, just to do some value signaling to the US, which in the end is what's behind all of this.
For sure. Okay, so let's move on to EVs, and specifically NIO, because today or yesterday, NIO announced that they're cutting 10% of their workforce. Now, this may be an interesting conversation because I know you actually own a NIO, Harold. And
yes,
I was at their factory in Hefei just a week ago. So I think
we just found out when we discussed today. Let's maybe share with our viewers. So we didn't know that I actually own a NIO. I haven't had it for that long, maybe 2 months. It's a quite new model, and I'll talk more about it. But just like I really love it. It's a really cool car. So for now, just that. But we'll talk more.
Yeah. So I they've announced that they're going to cut 10% of their workforce at the end of 2022, which is the numbers that are available. They employed 7,000 people. Now, I'm not sure where all those people are, because certainly the factory, there's not a lot of people there. Their production line is fairly highly automated. I actually shot a video. We were not allowed to film in the factory itself. But for the video, I pulled some footage from actually video NIO that shot themselves. But I can tell you, I actually went around the factory, and it is pretty automated. It was quite a surprise to me just how few people are actually in the factory itself. So I would imagine a bulk of those people must be in non-manufacturing roles, I guess. Maybe procurement or marketing or something like that, because there sure was not that many in that particular factory. So that's the first thing. And I was speaking to the marketing woman there, and she kind of explained to me that NIO are trying to be like a lifestyle brand as opposed to just a car brand. And I often think whether that is maybe one of their mistakes, is I think they've come under a lot of criticism for spending on things that are not part of the core, i.e. they've spent a lot of money on developing a phone, you know, and that market is like super competitive. You know, even some of the big players who've done that for years, the margins are like wafer thin. And then the other thing, and if you put the photo up of the NIO house, Vicky, they also have like a sort of chain of these like chill out areas. No, not that one, the NIO house. Yeah, they have a chain of these like places where you can go to chill out, and it must cost a fair bit of money to run and operate those places. And again, I feel that, you know, is it really necessary? But as a NIO owner, I'd be interested to know what you think, Harold.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because maybe also another background that I have. I did work for 6 years at Volkswagen as first consultant and internally in Volkswagen. And one part of that work was with the R&D department to do market research on how the Chinese market develops. It was a very interesting period from 2014 to 19, 20, around that. And in that period, it was really the shift towards electric vehicles, while at the same time, automated driving, self-driving cars became more and more a topic that wasn't just science fiction, but that became like really seriously discussed. Like, will it come? When will it come? In what way will it come? And so from that, I have really some insights to share on this. And I think NIO is doing the right thing, but they may not do it at the right sequence or with the right speed. Because what will happen, at one day you will have the robot taxi, which are completely self-driving cars that are electric. They can pick you up for the ride that you want to take. They let you off, and when they're empty, they will recharge. They go themselves to a charging station. They recharge. Once they're charged, they go back on the road, and whoever calls them will be driven. So if you know, like Uber, or in China Didi, that's the tech to hail the cars, and then they're self-driving. You don't even need drivers inside them. And once that happens, shared driving will become so cheap and ubiquitous and convenient that a lot of people will not buy a car. It's not, you know, the WFEF vision that you own nothing and be happy, but more like that you don't need to own a car because it's just so convenient without. And only very few people who really are big car fans or just have too much money, they will still buy cars just as a status symbol or as a hobby. And in that situation, the cars will become almost like a commodity. It doesn't really matter in which brand hardware you're sitting. So the question is, for car brands, what will they be producing then? What will they be offering to consumers? And that's where NIO is going. So they have this lifestyle, this community. They have an app. They have now the cell phones. As you've seen in the picture before, maybe from the NIO space, I took that picture today because I just went there, and it's a really nice space. I have to say, in China, one of the most expensive things is space because you have such high population density. So the difference between a cheap and an expensive restaurant is often not even the food quality. Cheap restaurants can have really good food in China, but the expensive place is the one that's quiet, where you have a nice big table separated from the other people. And that's what's expensive. And so NIO space is a space where only car owners and their families can go in. And it's a coffee shop kind of place, a high quality coffee shop. It also has, for little children, it has like a little playground where they have hired some like kindergarten teachers that take care of your child. So if you go shopping, you can bring your child there for an hour or two. You do your shopping and you pick your child up again. And that's all for free. That's all offered. The only thing you pay for is coffee or like drinks. And so it's an offer to really create this brand loyalty that I think makes sense, but they need to become a big car company first. So that's definitely a challenge. And when you ask about the employees, maybe that's another important point. Definitely they have like 4 or 5 people at each of these places. So if they have 100 places, that's already 500 people there. You have the sales staff that's there, the test drive staff that takes you on test drives. So that's easily a few thousand people already. In terms of workforce, it's actually not a big workforce. Like if we think of big car brands like Volkswagen, they have more than 100,000 people. So these are really huge companies. And they need to see where they're going with this, because also the big car brands can and could automate a lot more than they're doing. And they have very strong workers' unions, so it's very difficult for them to reduce staff. And in the long run, there's a lot of potential for these newcomer brands. But as we see now, they need to be very careful in terms of how to manage their cash flow, how to grow, how to finance the growth without too much debt, how to get enough investment coming in. It's a tricky path, but I see huge potential for a NIO brand, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I mean, I at the factory they have quite a large serum. I totally get what you're talking about creating a lifestyle brand and the robo taxis, because that's already starting to happen in some areas now in China. But I just look, so we're at the factory and they have a huge showroom as part of the factory. And I was walking around and I think it's is it the ES8, which is their largest vehicle. Now that starts at like 500,000 RMB, and it goes up to about 650,000 RMB, depending on how you have it, specified. But then I look at like the Huawei, who is slightly different the way they do it, because Huawei work on the technology and they partner up with other vehicle manufacturers who manufacture the car. So Huawei are not actually working on the car, they're working on the technology. But they've just released the M7. And I would say from a specification point of view, it's not that much different to NIO's top of the line. But that comes in at like 250,000 RMB. That's a significantly, that's 250,000 RMB cheaper for a very similar car. Now, I haven't compared them, spec for spec, but from a casual car buyer, I look around the M7, I look around the top end NIO, and there doesn't appear a huge amount of difference, both with the technology or the specifications and the finish of the car. And it was quite interesting, that a nugget of information I picked up when I was at the NIO factory. Next year, they plan on launching a sub-brand of cars which is significantly cheaper to compete in that segment of the market. Because, I mean, if you look at the EV industry, I think NIO sales are quite low compared. I think they're sort of near competitors of like Xiaopeng and Li Auto. Li Auto is a bit unfair because most of their sales are hybrid. They're not pure EV. But then you look at somebody like BYD and they're like massively ahead of, anybody else is like nowhere near them. And I just wonder whether it's the smartest move for NIO to try and compete in an even more, because like the lower priced ones, like the sort of 100,000 to 150,000 RMB, that mark is like way more competitive than the higher end. And I think, are they, diverting their attention yet again to try and bring out a sub brand? I'm really not sure if that sort of is the way to go for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things in that, and we're getting into like business strategy now, if you want to argue about these, and there's pros and cons to everything. I think what's very important to say, maybe first I want to start with the M7, Aito M7. I don't think that's comparable to the ES8, because ES8 is a 6 or 7 seater. I think that's the main specification of that car, is that it's big. It's for families with either with the help for the children or with like a third generation, like 3 generation families.
But the Aito M7 is also a 6 seater, right?
I thought it's a 5. Okay, I'm not an expert. I just looked at some pictures that
maybe somebody watching can just confirm that, because I think it is a 6 seater.
Okay. All right.
I think.
But what I want to say, I mean, what I want to say is the point of luxury cars is that they need to have a strong brand. And, you know, like 20, 30 years ago, a Mercedes, an Audi was really more reliable, had more comfort than a VW or a Skoda, or you know, like a cheaper brand. Nowadays, technically, they're all very reliable, they're all safe, they're all comfortable. They have, you know, some details. The thicker glass makes them more quiet. You know, some gadgets that they add in. And again, Volkswagen is this brand that has all the lines. It goes from Bentley, super luxury, like $1 million for one car, US dollar for one car, down to a Skoda that is a rather low cost car. And they on purpose do not put some of the tech in the cheaper cars in order to keep the value for their higher end brands. But technically, it's, you know, like, it's a question, does it make sense? Because if you put it in all your cars, then you can scale it more, and scaling again makes things cheaper in production as well. So this is really strategically a very, very tricky question, how you roll out your technology from the high end brands to the lower ones. And it may be the idea of NIO, a huge cost for car companies, always the R&D to develop the tech. And by having a lower cost brand, you can reuse the tech that you developed already maybe 2-3 years back, and now you use it in cheaper brand, whereas the newest tech you put in your high-end brand. These are some thoughts that they may have. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm not consulting NIO, so I don't know what exactly they're thinking. I'm not also saying that necessarily their strategy will succeed. What I'm sure, of course, Aito, with the Huawei partnership, they have a huge competitive edge that they can work with Huawei, which really is an extremely successful high-tech company. BYD, on the other hand, they just have a long history. They're the first electric car maker in China, so they have a really long experience in making electric cars, and they have really beautiful cars too. Like,
with BYD, though, a lot of their sort of lower end models don't have that much technology. There's sort of under 150 or 200 RMB. They don't have a lot of tech. I was very impressed. I haven't experienced the full tech in their high-end NIOs, but certainly in the M7, I was seriously impressed with the technology they have in that. There's some, it's really good. But like you say, they have
when you make it to Shanghai, I'll give you a test ride.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I'm actually in Shanghai on Tuesday.
All right. Now, another thing is the tech, like Huawei, they definitely can do software. They have the sensors. That's where they're very strong. But will they be able to produce really the hardware of a car? And I have to, like, I think Aito is not actually really the Huawei car. So Huawei denies to be Aito. Aito always emphasizes that they work with Huawei. So it's kind of a communications struggle between the two companies. They're kind of friends with benefits and enemies at the frenemies with benefits.
Yeah, I think Huawei concentrate on the tech, and the other company
and will the hardware, you know, do they get the basics done? They may. The same with Tesla. I remember 10 years ago, the German engineers in Audi, Volkswagen, they looked down on Tesla. They said, yeah, they can produce a few cars, you know, but once they scale up to 100,000, then the quality control will come in, and there will be challenges that they're not able to handle. Half true. Tesla has since had some horrible accidents where people died because the autopilot didn't work, etc. On the other hand, Tesla is now selling large quantities of cars, so they could scale up. So we'll have to see which one. In total, like in the big picture, I'll say some of the electric car brands in China will fail, will just not be able to make it independently. But what probably will happen then, they will get bought either by non-Chinese brands or by Chinese state-owned brands, which still have the size, they have the cash, but they're just technically not up to speed anymore. There's several candidates you can think of. They may just acquire one of these new brands that don't have the finances, or even, you know, like asset management companies that are there to stabilize the economy and to do like long-term investment. They say this car has potential, it's a good car. it didn't finance well, so they're now bankrupt, but we'll refinance them and ensure that the tech team can continue to build this kind of cars. What I also will say is the challenge for German and American car brands is huge. I think the Japanese are,
it's massive.
they're a bit more adapted. They're also closer to China, but the Germans, and not to mention French and
well, I think we're already seeing this now. I mean, we've seen recently Volkswagen have bought a stake in Xiaopeng to use their chassis, because if you actually look at the technology that European have got, they're some years behind where China are, and China actually, it's very difficult for them to catch up, because one of the key components in these EVs is battery technology, and China are way ahead on that. And you mentioned in the conversation earlier about the way Chinese can scale. They have some battery plants that are like, it'll take years for the West to catch up with those, because China companies own the whole supply chain from the mine to the finished product. And you see it now. I think what's the big European company that have just done a deal with one big battery company here, or a car company, Stellantis have just done a deal with a company here to get the technology. We've seen Volkswagen do a deal. I'm pretty sure that very soon, and I suspect it might be a BMW or a Mercedes may buy a stake in NIO to get their technology, because NIO do have some good technology. And it's ripe for takeover, not takeover, but for a European alliance so they can catch up. Because I think Europe are almost resigned to the fact now that it's going to be very difficult for them to catch up with where China are with EVs. So it's all about trying to do mergers.
So I didn't prepare this well, but I remember 1-2 years, or maybe a few years already back, the German car makers, there's like 2 brands for people who are not familiar. There's 3 brands in Germany. There's the Volkswagen Group, which contains Porsche and Audi. Now Porsche is separate, but they used to be part of the Volkswagen Group. Then there's the Benz Group, Mercedes-Benz. And then there's the BMW Group. So these are the 3 big independent brands. And they had this proposal where they said, we Germans need to work together to build a German battery pipeline where we produce the battery packs for our electric cars, and then we can compete on the chassis, on the tech, on the fancy stuff that you see. But the batteries, we need to scale them, and each of us individually is not big enough to get this scale for these big battery manufacturing plants. They couldn't do it. And I think this is a tragedy of Germany nowadays. Germany used to be the capital of the world in terms of engineering capability. Now they cannot build an airport. They needed 30-40 years to build the airport in Berlin. It's just, Germany is stuck, and it's sad to see for fans of the German car brands. They still have some edge in some fields. They have good designers. They have some niche technologies, but overall, I find it hard to imagine how they want to catch up again.
Yeah, I think China are now are too far. It's quite interesting, because I put the video up about that, and I had somebody, obviously a Westerner, commenting that, oh, well, all Chinese EVs are a pile of junk. I'm thinking, have you seen them? He obviously hasn't experienced any, because like what I'm seeing, I mean, you mentioned VW earlier, even they're struggling with their EVs. There was something that they're losing, like, I don't know, $20,000 per EV. That's Ford. Sorry, Ford are apparently losing $20,000 to $30,000 per electric vehicle they sell. But I think VW are struggling in the Chinese market, because
I see these VW. Like, I don't want to be anti-branding or anything, but I cannot see why I would look at the VW EVs. I just don't see them.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
I
don't see them on the road either.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very good Chinese EVs out there. I was at the Shanghai Auto Show like 4 or 5 months ago, and there's just some really cool stuff there. It was mega busy, and it was quite interesting because you walk around, all the EV stands predominantly were Chinese brands, and they were absolutely swamped with people. Then you walk around like the incumbents, like the German and the Europeans and the French, and they were almost empty. There was just nobody looking around them, and just what a contrast, because Germany was sort of a massive in the car industry just like 5 years ago even, and it's like slid, so it's changing so quickly.
Hasn't China overtaken Germany as the biggest car exporter?
It has,
as well?
Yeah. I think it was Japan, and they overtook Japan as well.
Yeah. Japan and Germany were close. They were always leading by far. And now China is not just the Chinese internal market, but also the export market. That's insane.
Sure, yeah. They're and the European Union are now rushing to try and launch investigations to say, and it's so stupid, because I think BYD, I think I mentioned this before, but I'm sure BYD would happily build a plant within Europe, for them to benefit from.
Sure.
Right, getting back on track, the thing is that NIO's sales have actually increased, but they're still hemorrhaging a fair bit of money. So I think if it was me and I was the top guy there, I forget his name now, you may remember his name, but if it was me, I think I'd be concentrating on the core business. I think I'd forget about all these sort of fringe things at the moment and concentrate on getting the core business right. It's like Apple, they concentrated on a computer and a phone, and then they turned themselves into a lifestyle brand. And I think, as you alluded to, I think NIO are trying to do it the wrong way around, But I hope they make it,
William just to
that's right. Name. Yeah, yes, that's correct. William Lee Bin. Yeah.
And I remember there was a brand. What was it called? Not Life is Good, but something. There was a brand that did quite successful smart TVs. Then they brought out a smartphone, and then they wanted to build a supercar. It was a Chinese brand. I forget what it was called. 5 years ago. And they went bankrupt because they did too much at the same time. So that should be a lesson. And I mean, huge respect to William Lee for trying to build a Chinese luxury car brand, like in a segment that traditionally was not covered by Chinese brands. I think they're on a good track. You're right. They need to see how they do it. They need to do things that other car brands don't do. Otherwise, they cannot become a luxury brand. That's the thing. You need to do some investment. And we'll see where it goes. I hope to survive. For me, the big thing is the battery swap. That's really the thing that makes NIO unique. And that's probably the thing that they should leverage and build upon.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah,
it's just,
it really is.
The freedom of a gasoline car, because you can change a battery when you don't want to waste time to recharge. But at the same time, you can charge it at home like a phone in the evening, so you don't need to ever go to a gas station.
Well,
so it really
you've got two options, haven't you? You can either charge or you can swap. And actually, they were telling me now they've got pretty good coverage on all the highways now in China of the battery swap stations.
More and more.
It's
and if they manage to convince other brands to use the same standards, that's basically when they win. That's how it would win.
That would be cool. Okay, so let's move on. So we're going to do a questions and answers session now. So keep the questions to the subjects we've talked about today, but when you put a Q at the front, so the young lady that's running the stuff in the background knows it's a question, and we'll try to answer as much as you can. Now, just to make you aware, I may have to look away to read the comments because they're on a different monitor to what's in front of me, so just bear that in mind. But yeah, start them off with a Q, keep them on subject what we've talked about today, and we'll do our best to sort of answer and chat.
And if you haven't liked yet, then please put a like on the stream.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be absolutely great. So do we have anything?
I'm just looking through some of the comments. Do we have questions already? I'm looking through some of the comments. One that I think is really funny is PB World said, "Can you imagine U.S. soldiers in Japan eating sushi every single day?" Yeah, in fact, that was about the buying seafood for their army. I was also wondering what if they really want to offset Chinese imports, like how much seafood do the poor soldiers need to eat?
I mean, I just while we're waiting for potential questions to come in, I mean, I live in Shenzhen, and just, I don't know, 3 years ago, I didn't see many EVs on the road. For some time, all the taxis and all the buses have been electric vehicles. I think that was a mandate by the Shenzhen authorities some time ago. But as private cars, I didn't actually see that many. But now I would say that I can walk out, and I would say it's a good 30%, maybe even higher. And the reason you can tell, if you don't know, in China, a plate on a standard combustion vehicle is a blue plate in Shenzhen, but if it's an EV, it's a green plate. So they're very easy to spot. And I would say, a good 30, perhaps 40% of cars I see now. And I think, like you said earlier, I think a majority of people now will either buy a pure EV or they will buy a hybrid. And I was
just going to say, if you say the fleet on the roads is now around 30% electric, and I back to at least 30%, then imagine how many of the new cars are actually battery electric cars. And some cities like Shanghai, Beijing, they actually actively promote it by, they have limits on license plates for new cars just because there's too many cars on the road anyway. But they make the limits less severe, less strict for electric cars. That means sometimes it's easier for you to get an electric license plate than a combustion license plate. And that's another incentive to buy the electric cars, which in this phase of switching technologies, it helps to get the EV market started. They used to have very big financial incentives as well. They're reducing them now, and they almost don't need them anymore because really the NEVs have come a long way.
Yeah, similar in Shenzhen. If you want a combustion vehicle, you have to, one, wait a long time to get the plate, and two, pay quite a lot of money. Whereas if you buy an EV, it's free of charge, the plate, and it's almost instant. There's no wait time at all. So there's a massive incentive, and something else I've read, that apparently if you do choose to buy a combustion car, you can get discounts of 30-40%. Some of the big dealers, there's a dealer I think called 4S, and apparently they're sitting on like massive amounts of stock that they're just having trouble selling of combustion vehicles because everybody's, and unlike Europe where EVs are still generally more expensive than a combustion vehicle, it's the opposite way around here. EVs are like unbelievably cost effective to buy here now. They're very cheap, aren't they?
And we've had the comment of Robert A. just now that said almost all taxis are electric. That's not a very good point. Not just taxis. I think Shenzhen was the first city to have the entire bus fleet electric. Other things to consider is the motorcycles. That seems a small thing, but there's so many motorbikes. And if you ever have been recently to Vietnam on holiday or so in Vietnam, they have the whole motorbikes still combustion engines. That's a huge difference. So the entire logistics from the motorbike to three-wheeler small transport cars to even now a lot of the logistics small trucks, they're all electric. The whole logistics of this whole Kuai system that delivers all the online shopping, that's all electric. So that's besides the private cars, that's a huge part of the Chinese traffic.
Well, in Shenzhen, combustion motorbikes are not allowed at all. So it's all e-bikes. You're not allowed to have a petrol or a diesel motorbike. Right, so we have a question off F. Liu. And do you think Huawei already has the capability to make more advanced chips than 7 nanometer in its own facility, or already been making them even. Okay, so
for you.
I know a little bit about this. So if you actually look at this chip that's in the Mate 60, now I can't confirm this for sure, but I've read reports that some laboratories are suggesting that it's actually at the performance of a 5 nanometer chip. It's made by a process using older lithography machines, which were not generally designed for making sort of smaller nanometer. They were actually designed for 14 nanometer, but there's a way you can like double expose. You can make 2 or 3 exposures to get to that level. And that is currently the biggest bottleneck in the manufacturing chain here in China, is the lithography. But there are a number of, I read snippets and there's little bits of information you pick up that they're working on other methods other than traditional style lithography. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're further along that road than we are aware of. So I think at the moment, they would struggle to go less than 5 nanometer. But you never know. I mean, it was interesting that, at Huawei's press conference just in March this year, they didn't allude to that they got that 5G. But I know that they've been making 7 nanometer chips for some time. To me, that wasn't a big surprise, because I attend sort of, tech conferences and exhibitions, and you just pick things up, and you just have to look at what's going on. And I think there's probably a lot more going on. Huawei have a huge amount of partnerships with many companies in the supply chain, and I think that there's a lot going on.
Just generally, that's how R&D works. You always have a pipeline of things that are already market ready and things that you're working on to make them reliable. Sometimes you have a tech that you can produce, but if you would scale it up, you get only 30% success and 70% will be waste products. So then it's not ready yet, and you still need to optimize. In that sense, I'm sure they have already newer tech in the pipeline that they've produced already, but maybe not yet ready for market rollout. So just on a more generic level.
For sure.
Any news about lithography machine on SMIC? That's one for you.
Okay, well, there is a company, and the name slips me at the moment. It's not SMIC. SMIC are actually a foundry, so they will actually purchase and use the lithography machines. And there's actually a Chinese homegrown brand that suggests they will have their own lithography machine. I think it's at 28 nanometer by the end of this year. And there's also, and I covered this in a video recently, that one of the manufacturers of, it wasn't a lithography machine, but it's another machine in the semiconductor process, saying already something like 75% of the components in their machine are non-US, and that by, I think, the end of the first quarter next year, 100% of the components in that machine will be non-US components. But there are a number of other technologies that can do basically the similar process to this lithography that are being sort of researched, and it may be that one of those breakthrough before the traditional lithography. Just for anybody who doesn't know, the reason why China can't buy lithography, there's only one company in the world that produce these most advanced lithography machines, and that's a Dutch company called ASML. And actually the head of that company is he actually understands that by not supplying to China, that he's creating a competitor for themselves. And they will lose
he's
sales.
also not able to export to China because he uses US tech.
That's
they
correct,
use US
yes.
tech in their
but
process,
it's actually
so the US doesn't allow
the Dutch government, not the company itself. The CEO has actually, Peter Wennick, has actually said he'd be quite happy to sell them, but it's actually the Dutch government, with pressure from the US, that's stopping the whole process, you know. But he's very aware that by not selling them to China, he's just creating a competitor. Now, what will happen is in I don't know, 5 years' time or 10 years' time, which to Westerners is a long time, but to Chinese people, they don't see that as a huge amount of time. China will have lithography machines that will compete with ASML. And the thing is, they will be half the price, you know, because China's scale, they will be able to manufacture them significantly cheaper. And that's when it'll be sad, but ASML will lose a lot of sales at that time, you know.
I want to pick up a question by a Barry Quinn, however the second name is pronounced. Sorry if I said it wrong, but I think it's a good question. I wonder how NIO is going to expand to other countries, because you need to build battery swap stations, and is already a heavy investment on charging station, but battery swapping station. So just to clarify, you don't need to swap batteries. So you can do both with the NIO. You can swap, but you can also charge them at regular charging stations according to the local standard. And Europe has already a unified charging standard. So they built them in Europe with the European charging standard, and you can recharge them at any charging station or at home. But at the same time, I know that they've already started investing in swapping stations already in Europe. I think in Norway first, as Norway has the most advanced electric vehicle market in Europe, so the highest proportion of electric vehicles, and then probably next to Germany, because that's the biggest car market in Europe. And so they're investing in it. But you're right, that's absolutely true. It's huge investment. And it's a bit similar to Tesla in the beginning. Remember when Tesla started, they said, we're not going to wait for governments to build charging stations. We're just going to build a Tesla supercharging network, which was a huge investment at the time. And it starts to pay off after a while. And so again, the question is, can you finance, get the cash flow in from investment, meaning get financiers to give them money in advance so that they can cover this period of heavy investment.
Any other questions coming in, Vicky? No, it's okay. So yeah, I mean, I actually think it's a good thing that you can charge both, because, you know, and I think something else that's really interesting in NIO, and I guess the use of this will become less and less as the charging network grows across China, but you were able to even call a mobile charging unit out. So if you were somewhere where there was not a charging station for a long distance, you could actually, a mobile charging station would actually arrange to meet you somewhere and recharge you. That's right, isn't it?
Sorry, what do you? Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's mobile charging station. It's kind of like rescue, that they have like a truck with a huge battery on the back, and that recharges you. That is if you get stuck somewhere and out of battery, and I think that's by law you have to offer that if you sell EVs, so that they can get away from being stuck out there. It's not something that you want to do. It's like a last solution, because you have to wait till that truck is there, and then when it's there, you have to wait for 10 minutes, 20 minutes to recharge you enough to drive to the next charging station. But it's like if you have a tire issue, that somebody picks you up and changes your wheel. So it's a solution to a challenge that exists.
Robert just pointed out that China are pretty well advanced in their lithography machines, so maybe he has some information or knowledge on that. But I do agree. I think China will be a lot further along the road than they will give information out on. I think they're aware that they have to keep things close to the chest until they're ready. I even suspect that Huawei could have probably released that phone months ago, but they're probably waiting for other things to be in place because they knew there'd be more backlash of sanctions from the US. So they wanted to make sure things were in place.
In that sense, it may not even just be their own decision. That may be something that they have aligned with the government of China,
For sure,
because
for sure.
increased bans will impact the entire industry.
Absolutely.
If I may comment on Chris Cox, who commented earlier, I still think hydrogen is the future. I think it's an interesting debate, hydrogen or batteries. What I believe is that they're not mutually exclusive. I think increasingly it will go in a direction where both coexist for different types of use cases and vehicles. Hydrogen, especially for heavy vehicles that need a lot of energy, where batteries are just not efficient because if you need to store a huge amount of energy, batteries will be too heavy. For these kind of vehicles, I'm thinking of long distance trucks. I'm thinking of maybe some long distance coaches as well. Hydrogen is a very good alternative. For the average car for daily commute, it's just the case that very few people need to drive more than 200-300 kilometers, more than 100-200 miles per day. And if you don't need to drive further than that, then a battery car really covers all your needs. And in that sense, hydrogen has a lot of its own issues. It has technological issues, how to really get the energy on the road, the efficiency from the hydrogen into electricity, into then driving the vehicle is rather low. It also has a problem because these fuel cells that transform the hydrogen into energy, into electricity, they're very heavy. So for small cars, they're not very convenient. Maybe there will be technology breakthroughs, or for small cars, as for motorcycles, the battery may be the better option. I don't think there needs to be either or. I think it makes sense that both coexist depending on the use case. Just as I believe for a rather long time in airplanes, helicopters, combustion engines, or like gasoline will be the way to go forward. I don't think it will be unified.
Mm-hmm. I think interesting. When I was in Hefei, we also went to the JAC plant where they were making some they were kind of medium-sized trucks, and I was speaking to sort of guy who was taking us around the factory, and I was asking because it seemed to be they were still manufacturing more combustion engine trucks there, and I was just sort of inquiring about the EVs, and he says, well, again, because battery technology, the density is still not really enough for trucks, because trucks are like, they will do a lot more distance in a day, that there's still more demand for ICE trucks. But he says as they see the battery density increasing, it's just that trucks will be slower than cars. But they are, CATL are one of the big battery manufacturers here, and they keep pushing the battery density. Every quarter or 6 months they sort of redefine the density of the battery, and it will eventually get there where you'll have these super sort of dense density batteries, and they will be fine for trucks.
I think there's
and
an
even
upper
airplanes.
Limit. There's an upper limit to how much energy per cubic meter can be stored in batteries. But there's different options how to solve the issue. For example, I know there are some tests already with buses that have a battery at the bottom, and then they have a wireless charging in the bus station. So whenever the bus stops at a station, it will just recharge. You could imagine to install the same thing at every traffic light. So whenever you wait for the red light, you're actually recharging. That will be huge investments, of course, upfront, but I'm just saying there are many options to solve the problems that we're running into next. And the same thing again with the self-driving cars. Obviously, they will be less dependent on a specific timeline. They can drive day and night and just keep going and recharge and keep going. That will again change the entire trucking industry. So there's so many variables that I think it's difficult to just say we'll go one way. I think there's a lot of different options how to solve some of the new challenges that come up with the new technologies.
Yeah, interesting you say that about roads and that, because 2 years ago I was speaking with a professor at in Chongqing in China. They have this like academy of autonomous driving, and the particular professor who was speaking to there, he doesn't believe you can get true fully autonomous driving until the things and the road is talking back to the car. And his prediction was to get to like level 5 autonomous driving, that you will need things within the road and the signs and the junctions where they're talking back to the car. You know,
why not?
and
But that's
what obviously the way they'll
deal.
build these new digital cities. In fact, if you look at Huawei's 5.5G, which is the next phase of 5G, those have the routers or the network access points can actually sense distance, and they will be used to talk back to vehicles for self-driving.
Right.
So it will be that like next level, which is
right. That's exactly where it will go. Yeah, I'm sure. Like, and I'm reading the comments that are coming in now. We do have a quite tech-savvy crowd apparently here. So we have good keywords: solid state and sodium batteries. The what was it? Artificial sun technology. Exactly. So there are so many different technologies in the pipelines that are coming up, and it will be very exciting and interesting to see how they merge together and how the application of several of these new techs together will really change the way we do things. So I think it's a whole new topic, but I think future research is a very interesting field.
And I think there's massive amounts of research into this happening in China. And this is what I really sometimes ponder when I see comments on videos I make about Chinese technology, that, you know, that I think some people in the West are living in this bubble where they think they're like super advanced, but China's like 30 years behind. And it's just not the case. You know, China have so much going on, and you know, if something's promising, the funding is put there, and they have the people who can do that, you know, and I just think sometimes
another important point is at least Europeans, they just imagine infrastructure is fixed, because in Europe you cannot tear down any building because there's always some kind of you know, protection for historic reasons and whatnot, so that you cannot change the cityscape. In China, you can just rebuild cities, you know, as long as you give people who live in a building a newer and bigger apartment, then they can be moved out of existing apartments. And in terms of what you just mentioned, this infrastructure that talks back to cars and completely self-driving cars, I can totally see that in China, that you just have specific roads where only self-driving cars are allowed, no pedestrians, no motorbikes. And that way you take a lot of the complexity away, because the most difficult thing for level 5 self-driving cars, which means fully self-driving, they don't have a steering wheel anymore, you cannot drive them by hand anymore. The most difficult thing for those cars is the hands-driven cars in between. If some of them are manually driven and some automated, it's very difficult to get a technology that can anticipate and respond to all the unexpected things that humans can do. But if you have completely automated traffic where all cars communicate with each other electronically, it's a lot easier to automate it fully. So these are things that China can just do, that just say, like, within this area only self-driving is allowed, and you park your car outside and everything inside is self-driving. These kind of things can do.
I think that's what will happen. I think that's the way it will happen. They will say, right, you know, for example, Guangzhou, 5 kilometers, you know, around the center will be all self-driving cars. And over time, they'll gradually expand that. And I envisage in the future where you will have an app on your phone, and you will pay a fixed amount each month, say, I don't know, 200 RMB a month. And for that, you can access the center of Guangzhou and have unlimited rides for your 200 RMB per month, you know, or it'll be, you know, X yuan per ride.
And that's exactly in that case scenario, that's exactly when the hardware, the car itself, will become a commodity and not very interesting, and therefore not profitable anymore.
Yes.
And I remember in VW, they were researching that scenario, and they tried to create their own ride-hailing app, which completely failed because obviously they're a car hardware company. They're not good at software, and they're nowhere near the speed needed to keep up with software developments. But they had this idea that you would have your VW app to get your rides, and because they see that the car itself is not going to be the long-term money machine that it is at the moment. And to Tommy Putra's statement, isn't already being used in China Bus that they automatically park and charge? I'm not sure about buses automatically parking, but I do know the NIO that I have, it has an automatic parking function, and it's very good. Like as long as the parking spot is marked with the lines around the parking spot, you really just have a voice command that you tell the car, I want to park. And then it shows you which parking spots next to your car are available. You tip on one, and then it drives back and forth until you're inside that parking spot. And it's really, really good.
Pretty cool, yeah. Well, the next stage of that will be you will get your vehicle at the entrance to the car park, and then it will just go and park itself. And then when you finish doing what you're doing, you'll just call it on the app and it'll come back to pretty much where you just get back in. I think that's the next stage of that. That's already being tested here. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's going to be amazing. And the other thing, once you've got these areas where there's only autonomous vehicles, there'll be so fewer cars on the road, because the movement, if you look at any traffic jam or any traffic buildup, it's generally caused by human kind of error, let's say. Whereas when they're all autonomous, the flow of traffic will almost be, it will never have to stop really, because they can all talk to each other, and the AI will know where to place those cars at certain times of day for maximum usability and things like that. So it will become very, very efficient. I don't see it being that long before that actually starts happening here. It's interesting. BYD made a very specific car just for DD drivers. It's not an autonomous car, but they included like features in that car that were specifically for DD drivers. So you can select the color of a light from the app, and when the car comes, the light's a particular color, so you know that's your DD ride. If you're in an area like an airport where there's a lot of DD, so you can actually select the color that the light comes on, and things just little things like this. And they have these sort of sliding doors that the driver doesn't have to worry about closing, because they're like automatic sliding doors and stuff like this. So it's that kind of step, to fully automation. And I think it'll be really good when it comes,
Question: what happened to China thorium nuclear reactor test? I do not know about that much.
From what I understand, it was fired up for a short amount of time, like 50 seconds or something. I may be wrong on that, but it was fired up for a short amount of time. But as far as I'm aware, they're making progress. And again, obviously, once they master that, that opens like huge amounts of avenues for energy. But yeah, I'm not fully up to speed on that, but
we could do a topic about energy, because there's so many things also with alternative energies. There's some things to discuss. I think it would be a bigger topic.
It would be cool.
Also, China kuwait 可惜听不懂，还是感谢你在听。So somebody who doesn't understand Chinese left a comment. Thanks for supporting anyways. What else do we have? Do they also provide benefits in China if you don't have a job, unemployment benefits? I'm afraid this is too big of a topic to cover tonight.
There is some, but it's not like the West, basically.
It's not like Germany and the Netherlands, which again is not like all of the West. So the US has a very different system of unemployment benefits compared to Germany, which has very strong unemployment benefits. But at the same time, you have to also see the comparison that in China, you have a very, very high rate of home ownership. And unlike in Europe, if you own a home, you really have to pay almost nothing to maintain that home. So you can get by with a lot less. And three-generation families are much more common. So this inner family solidarity works better than I'd say in many Western countries. So there's so many aspects to it that, in short,
it's a big
China
topic,
is per capita less rich than the West by far. And therefore they cannot have as many benefits as the West, but there are some. And overall, I think
it also varies massively from one area to another in China. For example, I was in Shanxi, in an area where they have coal mining. And that coal mining area makes a huge amount of money. I mean, I think the figures from the one mine, they made like $6 billion last year. But the whole community has like completely free healthcare. They have other benefits because that area is very wealthy. Whereas you go to a sort of less wealthy area and the benefits will be different. And that's why a lot of migrants want to get hukou. Hukou is like how would you explain a hukou, Harold? What's the best way of explaining that to a Westerner?
Well, it's a bit like a passport within the EU. You're allowed to travel without it, but you're not entitled to all the benefits, although it's stronger than the passport in the EU because you're not allowed to send your kids to certain schools in certain cities if you don't have the local hukou. So it's kind of like it's less harsh than being a foreigner, but it just encourages people to stay where they come from. And that's a good topic. We should
what I was trying to say is that, like, if you look at the big rich cities in China, like the Shanghais, Guangzhou, Shenzhens, people want to get a hukou in those cities because generally the benefits are more generous in those bigger, richer cities than the rural areas.
Yeah. All right, we're at 100 minutes past already.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess if there's no more questions, we'll give it another 1 or 2 minutes for questions. If there's nothing comes in, then I guess we'll wrap it up for tonight.
Clive, isn't it just complete human disconnect? What happened to be free to choose to drive? I mean, I guess there will still be room for fun driving where people choose to drive at driving ranges and just do it as a hobby. When you had horse and donkey carts, you could basically sleep while your donkey knows the way. Sometimes things change. So yes, it will be a big change. It will even be a loss of autonomy if it's fully autonomous and there's always a third party that can intervene with your car from outside. So there's risks coming from that. What if a hacker gets into your car? So yes, there's huge changes coming.
I think interestingly though, like if you think now how much productive time is wasted sitting in traffic in cars, whereas once you've got these autonomous pods, you could literally have business meeting while you're going from one destination to another. We actually went to the Hongqi sort of, it's like a museum they have. I forget what it was, maybe Jilin, and they had this concept there, and it was literally like a pod. And you had a big table in the middle and like 4 big armchairs. And you could just imagine, getting into there, shutting the door, having a sort of host who's serving drinks and food while you're zipping along the highway, having some like business meeting and signing a contract worth millions of dollars. It'd be pretty cool. It's but now you feel it's a concept, but it's not going to be that long before that's actually a reality. So I think the productive time will be better because there'll be less waste.
Well, that's what I was trying to say. Difference is there, and but it's not necessarily bad. But it's very different. And it's going to be different. Just a quick one on Pubok Chiasm question: is China going to collapse again? I assume that's a joke. So I'm not going to. We're not going to. Don't need to pull it up. But yes, thanks. Of course, if you ask Gordon Chang, then I'm sure China will collapse again.
It's been collapsing for 20 years, according to him.
Right, and then we have Clive here with another big question. Clive, you're really bringing the big topics tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining
that
us.
is a topic for another time, but China are pushing ahead with that. But that would be an interesting one to talk about, the digital currency.
Definitely. And the social credit system as well, just on a very, very short answer, no. There is no comprehensive political social credit system. The actual running social credit system that work, that they're really about credit. They're about paying your fees when you go online shopping and things like that. So that exists, but not like political opinion that you post on social media and that gives you plus or minus.
It's actually not much different to the credit systems you have in the West. You know, it's about getting approved for loans and borrowing money and things like that. You know, it's not like, you know, you get people think, oh, if you buy alcohol, that's negative points. If you help an old lady across the road, that's positive points. You know, it's just ridiculous.
You can drink alcohol on the roads, which I'm told in the US you're not allowed to. So you have some freedoms in China as well.
Yeah.
Is there already commercial run drone taxi in China? Like as in flying taxis?
Not taxis, but parcel deliveries for sure. And meal deliveries.
Right. I don't think flying cars are already commercially available in China. I've also somehow in the back of my mind, I seem to remember that some test flying taxis have been approved for trials.
I know Xiaopeng have a kind of drone flying car, but I get the feeling it's more of a marketing thing than something that's going to be a reality anytime soon. But
probably, I think to be honest, I think the Middle East is leading in that field. Like there's some Arab countries that have a lot of flying taxi experiments going on. I forget which city it is, but I remember one on the Arab Peninsula. Where maybe it's because they have also lower population density and they have like more like, you know, real monarchs, kings that basically if somebody's just excited about it, they can just allow it.
Yeah.
So there's something happening there. But Chinese are involved in the research, that's for sure. I see you guys really waited till we say we're going to wrap up, and now you bring the cool
bombard
questions.
us with questions.
Dubai, it may be Dubai, by the way. What is life like in China than the West, as in compared to the West, I guess, in general? That's a big question.
It's what you make it. I mean, from my personal point of view, on the money I earn, I can live a better lifestyle here in China than I can in the UK, and that's because a lot of things like I just give you one example. So if you own or rent a property in the UK, you have something called council tax. That can be from, you know, 100 to £300 or £400 a month. Well, in China, you rent a property or you buy a property, you don't have a council tax. You may have a small, if you're part of a community and there's some communal areas like gardens, you may pay a small monthly fee for the maintenance of those gardens or the public spaces and areas within your community, but it's not anywhere near the sort of level that you would pay in the UK. So that's just one thing. Another quick thing is like energy, because all the energy companies are state owned here. They are not, their first priority is not to make profit. So the cost of like gas and electricity and water here is significantly lower than the UK. It's probably 20% to 25% of what it costs in the UK here. So again, another like major cost saving here. So, but basically what I'm saying, on a fixed salary, you're for me, my money goes a lot further here.
Besides financial considerations, like one thing that I think is a huge difference is just the population density. Now, if you compare to life in, I don't know, maybe Jakarta or Tokyo, you also have huge density there. But if you compare to Europe, I think a big difference is you need to like people in general. If you're the person who likes to go on long hikes in the forest, just like to be alone with your dog or things like that. A lot of people in Switzerland are like that. Then China may be difficult for you to adapt unless you choose to go to West China, which is a completely different landscape, different environment, but also has much less job opportunities. It has much less high tech. If you buy things online, you can get things, but it takes a week or 2 weeks until it arrives. Whereas in the big cities in the east of China, it arrives on the same day or the next day because they always have it in stock locally. So it depends very much, as Lee just said, it depends very much on where in China you are. But I think the typical experience of living in China for a foreigner is you live in the East Coast in one of the modern cities. You will have very, very good quality infrastructure, super clean, fast subways, like, not quiet. There's a lot of people in the subways, but not noise from the subway itself. You have very good buses, even though few people use the buses. You have very low cost taxis, like Lee just said. The difference in energy costs even more extreme, I find, with taxis, like just how far you can go in a Chinese ride versus a European ride. So you're very mobile for very low cost. And you have a huge variety of things because in all of these huge cities, you have to imagine the population that's bigger than a mid-sized European country. So Shanghai has like 22 million people, 25 million, around that. Bigger than most European countries except like France, Germany, UK, Spain, Italy. You have Shenzhen, which itself, I think, has some 10, 12 million, but it's a cluster of cities, and the cluster altogether with Guangzhou, with even Hong Kong altogether, it's like 100 million people. So it's huge numbers of people. And among those, you have people from every European country. You have people from Turkey, from Arabic countries, from African countries. So if you like any specific food, Mexican, Argentina, you get the specific, very, very local restaurant by people from the country, for people from the country. So you get very authentic food. So you can choose your life very much. You can get anything you want in these massive cities, but you have to be able to like people.
Yeah. And something else, which is something that I think is very important in China, the level of personal safety here is like nowhere else I've ever been. And that's something that surprised me when I first come here 18 years ago. There was petty crime, and there's even very little of that in major cities now. It's shocking that you can walk around Shanghai or Shenzhen, which are massively densely populated cities, and you can see a 19, 20-year-old young lady walking around holding the latest iPhone 15 with not a care in the world. And that's something that, a lot of people talk about freedom, but I actually think personal safety is a big freedom. There's many cities you can't do that in, and you can here.
Yeah, that's a very good point, especially for women of all ages. It's just this safety for women. And even as a man, if you have a wife or a girlfriend or a daughter, it just makes you feel much more calm, that you don't worry when they're out alone at night. And that's really a very important aspect as well. I'm not going to give dating advice. I see some of the comments, but if you want to come to China, do so. You can get tourist visas again. So China is fully opened again. Depending on your qualifications, you find jobs. For something that people may not consider enough, there's a lot of jobs of localization for all kinds of companies who sell all kinds of products around the world. They always need people from those countries to help them translate and to do after sales and these kind of things. And a lot of those jobs are also located in China. So that's something you can search for if you want to come work in China.
Yeah, it's not just teaching. A lot of people think people come here
Yeah.
to teach, and there are a lot of people who come here to teach, but there's also a lot of people, like you say, I have a German friend, and he's like a product designer at an electronics company in China.
Right.
And there's people who do marketing, like you say, you know, some of these Chinese companies, they will sell to 20, 30 other countries, and they will need staff who know the local markets better than the Chinese people do, know the local languages better. So there is a lot of opportunity here.
And the teaching less and less unless you're really born a native of UK, US, Australia, or New Zealand. By law, it's not allowed if you're from a non-native English-speaking country to teach English. It used to be no issue because they just were happy with anyone, especially with a white face. But that's changing increasingly. They're stricter to enforce the law. It's kind of like in some more remote places, it may still be that they take anyone who looks like a foreigner. But in the big cities, it's more and more that they really need you to have a passport from one of those countries, which I don't have, for example. So nowadays, for me to teach English would be difficult. So I don't recommend to go that path unless you're really an English teacher from one of those countries.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to wrap up in a second, but I'd just add, you know, if you do think of wanting to come and live here, come first of all for you know, a month or two on a tourist visa and explore some different cities, see if it's because I know people who've come here and they don't really like it because I think the main thing, like you mentioned, Harold, is they're very dense cities. So if you've grown up in an area in your own country where, you know, there's not that many people, that's a massive shock when you arrive in China. It is very densely populated in the big cities. So first of all, come here to see if you like it before you make that big commitment. But anyway, time has overtaken us. So we thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's been very interesting conversation. There's so many topics come out of tonight's discussion, which we can do in the future, which we will. But yeah, thank you very much. And as always, for now, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.